Okay, and we are live on Facebook today. I'm really excited to be here with climate detective Matthew Ayre. So thank you so much for joining us, Matthew. Could you tell us where you're joining from and a little bit about what you do as we get started and settled?
Absolutely. So thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'm a climate detective at the Arctic Institute of North America, which is at the University of Calgary in Canada. So that's where I'm calling from today. My work involves looking at the past Arctic climate using 200-year-old documents from ships that used to go up there to hunt whales.
That's pretty amazing. So can you tell us a little bit more about these 200-year-old documents from ships?
I can. So,
what is it? I mean, are these maps? Are these?
They're like diaries.
Okay.
So 200 years ago, we didn't have crude oil. So we didn't have plastic, we didn't have petrol, we didn't have gas, but we still needed oil for things. So, and the most reliable way to get that was from the fat of whales.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to send boats up to the Arctic to hunt the bowhead whale because it was really fat and really slow. And then we peel the fat off these whales, it's pretty gross, cut it into little cubes and then boil it up and it would create oil. And then we use that oil to lubricate machinery, to light street lamps, to make soap, to make margarine. It was used in all sorts of weird things. And when these ships went up there, they were big sailing ships, kind of like a pirate ship. And every day they'd write what the weather was doing. So say the date, where the wind was coming from, how strong it was, whether it was raining or sunny or foggy, what the ice was doing, if they saw any icebergs, did they catch any whales, what animals they saw. And then from these daily accounts, these daily diary entries, you can go back and you can take this information out and you can start to build up a picture of what the climate was like in the past. So I'm super interested in what the ice was like because the sea ice in the Arctic is melting really fast at the moment and getting smaller and smaller every year. So as a scientist, I want to know what it used to be like.
Right.
To see what the changes today are, like how extreme are those changes that we're seeing today.
Well, that is so interesting. I don't think I've ever met a climate detective before and ever heard of reconstructing from journals, but it makes sense and what a fascinating what a fascinating thing to do. So as you know, from coordinating this event, we sent out to our subscribers this month a box about Arctic science. So there's a lot of kids around the country, around the world actually, learning about the Arctic, and they've asked a lot of questions. So today I'm going to read some of them to you. So thank you to everyone joining and hopping in. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, tell us about the animals in the Arctic and have you ever seen a polar wolf? This is from Stacy, age 6.
I have never seen a polar wolf.
Ever.
I saw my first wolf this year while up in the Yukon, but we were a little bit south of the Arctic Circle when I saw it.
Okay.
I'm very lucky that I get to go to the Arctic every year to do my work. I get to see lots of polar bears, which is amazing and terrifying. They're very scary. Thankfully, every time I've seen one, I've always been on a boat, but they're not even scared of boats. They are the apex predator. So they see you as food, which isn't great. But I was once on a 420-foot icebreaker, 500 miles north of Alaska, and we had a polar bear charge the ship.
Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
It was super interesting. Like, it was cool because we were really safe on this big boat, but seeing this huge polar bear, just not scared at all.
Yeah.
I think the other animals that really define the Arctic are the whales that live there.
Yeah.
So I get to look at these whaling logbooks, which are hunting the bowhead whale. And last year, I also got to see my first bowhead whale.
Cool.
So it's really sad that the whaling industry nearly hunted them to extinction. So they're really rare now, but since we stopped whaling, their populations have have built up again, and they're getting close in some places to pre-whaling levels, which is great. And the bowhead whale is really fascinating to me. It's the oldest living mammal on the planet. So they can live
Wow.
over 200 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the narwhal's super cool. I think I've seen the tail of a narwhal before, but they're pretty elusive. But they're the ones with the big horns out the front that kind of look like unicorns in the sea. And in
Yes.
these old whaling logbooks, they actually call them unicorns. It's really cool. So you're reading and it says, "Oh yeah, saw 3 unicorns today."
That's amazing. Wow, how interesting. These are animals that, I think are just so fascinating to kids, in part, like you said, because they're so elusive and because, most people don't go to the Arctic to see them. So can you, one of the questions, let's see, I have here is Julian, age 6, who wants to know how cold it gets in the Arctic, and have you ever gotten frostbite?
Hey, Julian. It can get really cold in the Arctic.
Okay.
The coldest recorded temperature in the Arctic, I can't do Fahrenheit. I can only do Celsius because I'm from England.
That's okay.
It's negative 89 degrees Celsius.
Ooh, that sounds cold, just thinking about it.
Super cold. That's way colder than your freezer. Yeah. That's maybe 5 times as cold as your freezer, in fact. When I go up in the summer, because it's the only time I can get to the places I need to go without the ice being there. So it tends to be a lot warmer. Although 2 years ago, I didn't get frostbite, but I did get hypothermia, even in the middle of summer. But
Wow.
the coldest temperatures I've experienced are right here in Calgary during the winter.
That's amazing, even in the summer. Oh gosh. Well, thank you for that. So we have another question here from Rowan, age 9, who really wants to know more about the Northern Lights. How common are they and where are they found? Is that something you could talk about?
Hey, Rowan, yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I get to see the Northern Lights when I go north, but what's really interesting, that's super cool to see for a start. They're amazing. But what's really interesting is you only see them at certain latitudes. So you can go too far north.
Interesting.
And then you stop seeing them. So the best place to see them is between about 58 and 63 degrees north. And they occur in like a circle all around that latitude, around the planet. Obviously, you can only see them at night. And you need a solar storm. So the sun, there's these big explosions that happen on the sun. They're called coronal mass ejections. And they fling out particles from the sun. And it's when those particles react with the Earth's atmosphere. And they only happen at the poles because that's where the focus of the magnetism is. So they get attracted down through the poles. And when they react with the atmosphere, that's when you get all these super cool colors. So they tend to be green if it's kind of a mild solar storm, but as it gets more intense and stronger, they can turn into like a really deep red and downfall over the sky. If you're higher up in the Arctic, you have to look south to see them rather than north. And you go a bit higher again, and they start to appear white. You can't see the color in them, and then you get too far north, and you can't actually see them at all. So.
That's so interesting. I didn't know. I thought the higher up, the better. I didn't realize there was like a sweet spot. So Anna, I think you're joining us too. So I hope that answers your question and then some, because it certainly did for me. That's fascinating. We have some questions here from the audience, or that were submitted about the melting ice. And what have you seen about the melting ice, and can you speak to that?
I can. This is the subject of my research mainly. First, we have to make the distinction between the types of ice.
Okay.
Because there are 2 main types of ice in the Arctic. There is sea ice, which is exactly how it sounds, and it's frozen seawater. And then there is glacial ice and the ice caps. So this is ice you find on land. It's made of freshwater ice, so you could drink it. And that's the same thing that produces icebergs when they break off into the sea. That's still fresh water. And both these types of ice are melting and reducing in size, and that has different consequences for our climate and really for the whole world. So I'll talk about sea ice first, and then I'll talk about glacial ice. So sea ice acts like a giant mirror on top of the planet. So it's quite reflective, and it reflects a lot of the solar energy we get from the sun. And therefore that helps to regulate how hot the Earth is. But because of climate change and the Earth getting warmer, the sea ice is melting a little bit, and therefore reflecting a little bit less heat, which is continuing to warm us up, which is melting a little bit. And every year since we have started recording what the sea ice, the extent of the sea ice from space, it has almost every year declined. There is some natural variation, so some years it's a little bit more, some years it's a little bit less, but the general trend is it's going down and down and down and down and down. And by 2050, so within 30 years, within, certainly within a lifetime, during the summer, there'll be no sea ice in the Arctic. Yeah, this is the predictions all scientists who are working on sea ice agree on. We see it in the evidence of everything we look at to do with the Arctic climate. This is really concerning. One, we're not reflecting that heat, so we are going to get warmer. But that sea ice is such an important ecosystem. This is the polar bear needed to survive, the whales needed to survive. The people that live in the Arctic rely on the sea ice for transportation and hunting, and they needed to survive.
For transportation, can you explain that a little bit? That's not intuitive to me, so I can imagine some others also have questions.
So lots of people in the Arctic live on the coastline, and these are really small communities. Maybe less than 100 people, and lots of people still hunt. So people eat caribou and whales and seals, and I've tried some of these things when I'm up there. Caribou is delicious. Whale, I'm not such a big fan of, but maybe I'm just not used to it. But there's huge stretches of open water between these communities and between areas where they need to hunt. However, in winter, when the sea freezes and you get sea that freezes that's attached to the land, is called landfast ice. And this landfast ice is very stable, and it creates a huge highway basically along the coastline. And that then allows people to, originally it was through dog sleds, to go back and forth between these communities and go to the edge to do the hunting. Now it's snowmobiles, and you can very quickly and very effectively travel just like a road.
Okay.
But again, as we're warming, the formation of this landfast ice roads are becoming less stable. They're melting earlier. They're becoming more dangerous, which is making hunting and transportation a little bit more difficult in the Arctic.
Interesting.
And then we have the other ice, which is the glacial ice. So you may have heard of sea level rise. Now, with the previous ice, the sea ice, when that melts, that doesn't affect the sea level because it's already there. It's seawater that is frozen, and therefore it just becomes seawater again when it melts. However, the glacial ice, which is on land, this huge body of fresh water, when that melts and goes into the ocean, it starts to raise the level of the ocean because you're adding water to it. So the biggest reserves of freshwater ice we have are the Greenland ice cap, and then even bigger in the south is the Antarctic ice cap. And we know these are both melting. It's going to take a long time for them to completely melt. They are over 3 miles thick in places. That's a lot of ice. But we're already starting to notice that it's raising global sea levels. And the amount it's raising global sea levels seems really small, like, less than an eighth of an inch, or a couple of millimeters at a time. And that, on the grand scheme of things, doesn't seem a lot. If you're at the beach and the water goes up by that much, you're not going to notice it. But what this means is that low-lying areas are more susceptible to storm surges.
Mhm.
It can now raise high. And this is going to continue, and we are going to have to adapt to it.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to change our reliance on fossil fuels to stop this warming effect. And that's something, as a global society, we are working towards. But the distinction between the two is, we have one that's going to raise sea levels and one that's going to potentially make us a bit warmer.
Yeah. How interesting. Well, thank you for explaining that distinction. I think it was really easy to wrap my head around it the way you explained it. So in terms, some of the questions we got were about what we can do to help, and you mentioned fossil fuels, but are there some other things that children can do or families can do in day-to-day that we can speak to quickly?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to make sensible choices. So don't waste things. Every time we waste something, we use more energy. So if you can use a reusable water bottle, you're not using single-use plastic water bottles, which take more energy to use. If you're going on a short journey and you can walk or take a bike or use public transport rather than use the car, again, a great choice. What else can you do? Recycling as well. The more things we can recycle, the less energy goes into disposing of just that general kind of waste. So there are lots of small little things you can do to make your contribution.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's something that we at Green Kid Crafts, we talk about a lot, and a lot in our community are really committed to. We always say, making smart or small green choices wherever you can, and they add up. They add up across the population, across your life, across everything, and kind of creating a market for these sustainable options as well. So thank you for speaking to that. I think we had one more question from Clover. I'm trying to find it here. Let's see. Have we gotten frostbite? We did that one. How about, what's the coolest thing you've ever seen in the Arctic?
Hey, Clover. So the coolest thing I've probably seen in the Arctic. That's a tough question because going to the Arctic is always super cool. I have to say the coolest thing I've seen is a shipwreck I discovered using these logbooks. So I was reading one of these documents and it mentioned a shipwreck, and then we went and found it.
Wow.
Going up to this super remote part of the Arctic and getting onto this beach, which was covered in polar bears, a little scary. But finding the shipwreck that had been there for 120 years.
Wow, that's so amazing. That's so cool. Just from reading these logs and kind of decoding that. That's so interesting. That's history and science and polar bears. I don't know what gets cooler than that, to be honest with you. And we have one more question here, which is, why are there no penguins? So that's one I don't want to forget.
Okay. So there's a really easy distinction to make between the Arctic, which is in the north of the planet, and the Antarctic, which is in the south. And that's where the penguins live. So the penguins evolved and live in the Antarctic, in the south. So you won't find them in the Arctic, just as you won't find polar bears in the Antarctic. If you did get penguins in the Arctic, they'd make a great snack for polar bears. So it's probably in the penguins' best interest to say south.
Yes, thank you for that. That's I'm sure the polar bears would love a new snack too. Well, thank you. I think that's most of the time we had for today. I really enjoyed listening, and I hope you all did too. Thank you for tuning in on Facebook, and for supporting Green Kid Crafts, and for talking about the environment with your families today. So again, thank you, Matthew. We'll share this video back with those who didn't make it, and it was just such a pleasure to have you on here. So great.
My pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Stay
Thank you.
careful with polar bears. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.